Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, Tech Talk, where we talk about various technology related topics and do a deep dive into one of the topics of our choice in every week. This week is a very special episode as well because we have a guest, Eric Bailey, here with us, and we're here to talk about the A11Y project. Eric is a designer who works for an agency in Massachusetts. He also writes about usability and accessibility for publications such as CSS Tricks and Smashing Magazine. He is also one of the active maintainers of A11Y project, and today we're pleased to talk to him about the project itself. Thank you, Eric, for joining us today. Really pleased that you could talk about your project. We are very excited. I think it's a really meaningful and powerful project, A11Y project. So tell us a little bit about the project and how you got involved with it and your journey about.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And also kind of fun at the time of this recording, it's actually Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Oh,
So we've got kind
we
of
didn't know that.
yeah, there's a bit of a 2-4 going on.
right.
So the A11Y project is, as you mentioned, is a project I help maintain. And it is a open source resource for anybody who is interested in building accessible websites or web apps or apps. And what it does is it provides blog posts, resources, and a checklist that anyone can read for free and kind of find information that they may need on how to best make an experience work for assistive technology. And the reason this is so important is basically there are different ways to access digital content, including apps and websites. And part of that is making sure that, the same way I, as somebody who has, who is sighted and can read things on a screen with my eyes, making that available the same way to somebody who has low or no vision and may need it read aloud by a digital voice via a screen reader or some other form of assistive tech.
Wow, that. I mean, to be honest, I didn't know about the project before Amit introduced it to me, and I thought this is such an amazing project, and this is quite necessary in current world as well. I mean, I've come across various accessibility options. When I buy a new phone, I usually go through all the settings to set it up for everything, and I usually go through the accessibility option. And I thought, you know what? There are so many things that are also helpful for so many options there are, which are also helpful for even me. And I can imagine that would be, quite helpful for people who need that kind of options. And there are a lot of things being done, but I also see that it's not the end of the journey at all. There is so much more that can be done and should be done in this space.
Yeah, I'm just like you. Like the first thing I do when I get a new app or a new phone or a new piece of software is immediately go into the settings and be like, all right, where are all those features that you're not telling me I have that are going to change my life? But
Yes.
yeah, you raise a really good point, which is, accessibility features are designed specifically to help disabled people use technology,
Yeah.
but many of them are usable by all. So, I'm of the belief that accessible design is good design. So presenting these options to everyone and kind of not making distinctions around who can use them is a way to, make technology work best for the person that needs it. Personally, I use a few accessibility features. Probably the one that jumps to mind is like a reduced motion experience on iOS.
Right.
And
Okay.
that should,
We both are Android users.
okay. Well, I hope this isn't weird.
No way. Okay.
So
Uh,
yeah.
I wanted to understand. I mean, I think a lot of people they're hearing about accessibility as well as A11Y. So can you just tell us uh, what is it? What is A11Y for the benefit of all our viewers and listeners?
Sure. So if you haven't heard it before, A11Y is what's known as a neuronym, which is basically a fancy sounding word for acronym. And it represents the 11 characters in between the letter A, which is the beginning of the word accessibility, and Y, which is the last letter in the word accessibility. Historically, it kind of bubbled up from Twitter, where there used to be a shorter kind of character length. So people would use A11Y as a way to save space when tweeting. And now it's been kind of codified as a way to talk specifically about digital accessibility. And the interesting part about this is in English, accessibility has a few different meanings. So there can be the accessibility of information, which is like, is it behind a paywall, or is it like, in an academic journal and really dense? That's not exactly what the A11Y project deals with. So when you use that acronym, it's a way to say, like, I'm talking specifically about digital accessibility. I'm talking about like how to use HTML in a way that works best with a screen reader, or like how to make my CSS work in Windows high contrast mode. So it's a really good way to like cut through a lot of generic Google search results if you're looking for information.
Okay, so
Right.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead,
So,
Rinat.
no, I was thinking of the distinction, digital accessibility, and well, if I want to talk about the other side of accessibility, is the physical accessibility. And I used to work for London Underground here in UK, and whenever we made any change in the stations, or we had to think about the Disability Discrimination Act and all the things that we had to take into consideration when we were designing any kind of solution. And yeah, of course, that is also an accessibility, and there is a lot of things to consider when you're doing something, when you're doing physical design. But nowadays, obviously, especially after the pandemic, more of our lifestyle has become digital, and it was happening slowly anyway. Now with the pandemic, we had a super boost on digital lifestyle, and we absolutely have to think about everyone, as an inclusive culture. As we go more and more digital, we have to think about how everyone can be inclusive in our digital life. And that's where I think it's so much powerful, this project that that you're maintaining, and helping so many people to be inclusive. And so basically that's what my understanding is, that physical accessibility is one thing, but now it's ever more important to have the digital accessibility.
Yeah, exactly what you said and how you said it. 1000%. Yeah, so it is, sorry. It's interesting times right now, not only because of the global pandemic, but right before, as you mentioned, physical protections for like things like building codes have existed for access for a while now, and that's due to a lot of work by activists in the disability space. But kind of right before the pandemic hit, there were some landmark legal cases, at least in the United States, which set precedent for digital experiences being considered kind of the same as physical, in terms of these are services that you need, kind of, and if access is restricted, that is a problem. And at least in the United States, that's a civil rights problem, as their protections, the same way, race or gender or religion are. So like you said, the pandemic has thrown a lot of this into, very real, taking it out of the abstract and making it very real. The thing that pops immediately into my mind are vaccination scheduling and coordinating websites that are unusable by assistive technology. And so that's not like, well, I can't look at Facebook. This is preventing me from accessing something that will save my life, conceivably. And that is incredibly important. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
Wow.
so yes, I mean I've built a website, and Rinat also has built a website, and we do this small test from Google, which is the Lighthouse report, and Google has now started ranking websites based on how accessible they are, and whether they are mobile friendly or not. And in those accessible test they give you a score, and the score could be anywhere from 0 to 100, 100 being the best. And I think A11Y project. What do you say, complements it, I'm guessing, because from what I've read your checklist, it tells you how to structure a particular HTML page, what to write in the tags, and what to think and what not to use in, say, the CSS code, because that will mean that the assistive technologies, say screen readers, and maybe people technologies that transcribe the voice, they can then, and maybe video as well, so those things can be actually handled by these assistive technologies and bring it accessible to more people. So can you talk a bit about that, like how is actually A11Y project complementing the Google Lighthouse report?
Um, yes, although we don't have any official association with Lighthouse,
Sure.
but I will say that I think it's very smart of Google to include accessibility scores in Lighthouse, the same way performance and SEO and all these other concerns are, as a lot of them are intertwined. Accessible websites tend to be performant websites, which is an interesting thing that we can definitely dive into. But our checklist is community built. So the things that you look at as you go down the list to check your site against, a lot of them reflect the internal rules that Lighthouse will use for its automated checks. So it's one of those things where you can kind of be reactive, so you can use Lighthouse and see what it flags, and then go chase down the errors and fix them, or you can potentially be proactive, which is to look at the checklist and see if you're doing anything there. And then after you've reviewed the checklist, run it through Lighthouse. The other thing that I think is a real value for the checklist and for the A11Y project as an open source project is it's free, and it's open and it's transparent, by which I mean that the rule set isn't hidden behind an extension. It's something that anyone can reference. It's something that anyone can open an issue against. It's something that anyone can improve. So basically, we want to make sure that this is open and available to everyone if they're so inclined.
Makes sense, makes sense. And I think, yeah, it's important that it's transparent, because as you rightly said, Google tells you about those things, but once you test it, once you submit your website, but A11Y project tells you upfront, like, okay, these are the standards that you need to follow, and if you follow this, your website will be more accessible. So I mean, we keep talking about these assistive technologies, and I'm sure that we might be limited in the way of our own experiences. So can you tell us a bit more about these assistive technologies across sight, hearing, and then maybe speech, and what are the kind of assistive technologies that are currently available to people?
Sure. There are a ton. um, my favorite little get you thinking example is I'm wearing glasses, and technically that's assistive technology. um, so
Yes, yes.
traditionally, though, more in accessibility, there's the notion of POUR, which is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And those are the four kind of main categories of how to think about disability. So perceivable would be if you can see something or if you can't and what you can do about it. So examples of assistive technology here would be screen readers, which is, I think, kind of the example that most people are familiar with, which is a piece of software that will read through the document object model via something called the accessibility tree, which is like the DOM, but for your entire computer. And it will read out information. So if you have a button that says, save preferences, so long as you're using a button element, it will go, button, save preferences. And then you can say, click save preferences, and it will do it. And that's really cool. There's also, for perceivable, if you have low vision, there are screen magnifiers, as well as browsers have the ability to bump kind of globally all the text on any web page ever. So that's something to definitely be aware of as we age and our eyesight starts to go and we find ourselves bumping up the font size just a little bit and a little bit more, maybe a little bit more. I unfortunately, I read Hacker News and I've blown their text size up real big because it's teeny tiny. For understandable, this is a little bit of a tricky one in that it deals with cognition and kind of digital literacy. So for here, you want to kind of make sure that somebody doesn't have to use assistive technology, which is a bit of a wrinkle, which is like, if you make something for a global audience to consume, making sure that it's as direct and as straightforward as possible. So if you're using metaphors, make sure that they are, they work across different cultures. If you are using kind of imagery, make sure that it makes sense. You want to have cultural considerations. Red may mean bad in certain cultures, but it may mean good in certain cultures. So that kind of thing. And then kind of just by virtue of using HTML, like a lot of cognition stuff can be addressed in that you can copy a word, you can look it up, don't use jargon, save somebody the effort of having to look up that jargon maybe. Operable, I'm getting my pour mixed up. Operable is kind of what I talked about a little bit before, where you want to give things accessible names by using semantic markup. So for this, a really cool example of assistive technology here would be voice control, such as Dragon or macOS actually has voice command software built in. So if I'm paralyzed, if I don't have the use of my limbs, I can actually use my voice to operate a digital interface. It's a lot of fun actually too, if you haven't tried it before. So you can actually say, click save preferences. And
I have actually seen the voice command, where I was thinking, how could it, it could become quite complex, and how could you, have commands for each of the different, variation of operations that you can do on screen. But then I was actually really impressed because the way it was done is like you have a screen grid, you bring up the grid and then you tell, oh, click on, B7, or that's how you kind of locate each place in the grid. And I thought that was amazing. And a lot of the times, when smart home devices like Siri or Alexa came about, I thought, okay, this is probably not going to be very popular because they're a much faster way of doing things than saying it out loud. But actually now I have one at home, and it is quite convenient. And you start to think about, these voice controlled devices can be so much powerful, because I now control all my light, my heating, everything with the smart home device, and it has benefit for everyone, improving this kind of technology.
Yeah, I also have smart lights, and it was a game changer. But yeah, these kinds of smart home automation solutions are definitely very useful in the disability community, and barring any weird bugs, very well received, as I understand it. Another interesting thing about voice control is, if you ever kind of want to have your mind blown, look up a video of somebody who uses voice control software as a daily user, use it. When we do it, it's kind of a novelty, and we're doing it to explore a new piece of tech. But when it's their daily driver, the same way, we don't think about typing and then somebody comes in and watches us type at 60 words a minute. It's pretty incredible. I would also say I know there are hands-free developers out there who use voice control, and it's really cool to watch, and it makes me think I don't know as much about programming as I should, because the grammar and the lexicon that they use. And meanwhile, I'm like, I think an open bracket goes here. I'm not sure.
Wow, that is amazing. I wouldn't have thought that straight away, because such complex syntax when you're coding, and a lot of the times I spent hours because I forgot a comma somewhere. And yeah, I would like to see that actually. I'll definitely Google it or YouTube it after.
Yeah.
So what are the other ones? RE, I think you were talking about the poor.
No, I
Oh, yeah.
think
Yeah, last is, I got my order a little bit wrong, but last is robust. And robust is one of my favorites, which is basically make it not brittle and not fragile. So you strip away the CSS from a website, you still have something that works. You load something on mobile, and it looks good on mobile. You load it on a tablet, looks good on a tablet. You use reader mode, you can read it. So making this technology interoperable and fault tolerant. And we don't think of that necessarily as assistive technology a lot of the times, but responsive design, so the ability for a design to work on your phone the same way it works on a tablet, is huge, because if I'm zooming my screen in, I don't have a separate experience, it just works. If I am using a low quality feature phone, it will just work. I don't have to have a fancy Apple laptop that costs thousands of dollars. If I'm on a PlayStation for whatever reason and using their browser, it just works. Maybe I want to order some pizza and I can't be bothered to get my laptop out. So we don't make distinctions around how somebody is using or why, because we largely can't know, and robust kind of handles that. So it's not assistive technology per se, but it's a mindset that makes things very friendly towards assistive tech.
Okay,
that's
so
actually, sorry,
yeah, so
that's quite fascinating, because I love standardization, and to be able to have a list of different aspects and of things to think about when you're designing stuff is actually really helpful for any designer or architect or engineer or coder, because then they can sort of go by the list and have a standardized things to sort of check off, which is very helpful when you're designing. So going back to you were saying wearing glasses is a form of assistive technology, and I think that is actually quite a powerful statement, because a lot of the times we don't actually think about how we are being assisted of different things. And another thing, I know of an analogy which I think is actually quite powerful to sort of describe disability, because a lot of the times if you were to ask what's the definition of disability, that could actually have a lot of gray area. But I sort of came across this analogy, which I think is amazing in describing what disability is. And that basically is, imagine, we woke up one day, or say tomorrow, and suddenly everyone can fly. All humans can fly, but for some reason I can't. And everyone is going to the library, going to work, and obviously because everyone can fly, they're just flying to everywhere, wherever they want to go. But I don't have any problem with not being able to fly, because I can drive to work. I can because all the infrastructure are the same. I didn't have any problem yesterday going around. And I don't have any problem today because I have all the things I need to live my life as I was living yesterday. It's just everyone else started to be able to fly. Now, things are going totally fine, and I'm living my life normally without any problem. But then a new building is being built, and the architect, because now everyone can fly, forgot to put stairs in the building because no one else needs it. Now I've become disabled. I wasn't disabled before the building was built, only because this architect, without thinking of the design for everyone, forgot to build stairs for me. Today, I've become disabled. I didn't become disabled the day everyone started flying because I had no problem living my life. It's the time when other people didn't take my needs into consideration. And I thought that was a really powerful analogy in describing what disability is.
Yeah, I like that. In the disability community, there's the notion of the social model, which is basically exactly what you described, which is disability is a mismatch between kind of capability and environment. So it's less a problem to be fixed for the individual and more, how do we as a society, adjust to address these kind of failings for access, which is to say that exactly like you said, the same way you forget to build stairs in a society where everyone can fly, the same way, why aren't buildings built with access ramps if we know that
Exactly.
wheelchairs are present?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we now think back, we are thinking that, oh, it's an additional cost or additional, waste of resource. A lot of people might think that, oh, building this ramp or building, but if not, I mean, if you think back, when you're thinking back, it feels like that. But if you were to think one step further, like if everyone could fly and you couldn't, then building stairs in a building is quite quite a necessity, anyone would think. But it's the same way. I mean, building ramp is a necessity because of it.
Yeah. And one of my friends has a talk called Selfish Accessibility that I quite like, which is if you can't be motivated by these notions, understand that one day they may apply to you. So if you're making stuff, make it so that your future self could use it. So like, if everyone can fly and then one day, it turns out anybody over the age of 40 can't fly, or, somebody hands you a really heavy load to transport for your job and you can't get off the ground, like, you're going to need those stairs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, Rinat, that was a very interesting analogy. And when we think about disability, and there is a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, especially in the UK, it's quite prominent. The government is quite keen on having all their digital services because UK is quite I'm not sure about the US market, but in UK, the government is quite active and upfront about having accessibility, especially when giving digital services to its citizens. And one of the key things that keeps coming up is diversity and inclusion. We have people from all different types of background and religious backgrounds, social backgrounds, and different preferences, etc. And then including everyone. So, does accessibility fit into that? Is it part of that inclusiveness, or do we have to have a separate uh, um, concept for that so that people who are disabled can be included as part of that? Because I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion in an organization, no one is thinking about. I'm guessing no one is thinking about the disabled people. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Personally, I think that diversity, equity, inclusion work is very vital, and it's also very intersectional. So it deals with identity and how you identify both in private and as a public persona. And I think disability is a core part of that, the same way age or gender or religion is. In the States, it's a little different. Anything that the government produces needs to be accessible. That includes procurement for physical goods and services, as well as digital content. And that's by way of the Section 508 Act. And then kind of, as I mentioned earlier, private industries, there was a lot of kind of wiggle room for digital experiences. You know, if you are a restaurant and you are building a building for your restaurant, you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is ties into civil rights, mandates that your building does need to be accessible. But now, as more stuff goes online, the question of what accommodation is gets blurry, because do you need to use a digital service to access a physical location? If you're ordering groceries, yes. So now there's precedent. In terms of how that wraps into diversity and inclusion work, I think it's worth considering disability. Sometimes it's left out. I've seen a lot of positive movement on this front, and I'm happy to see more and more private industries adopting DEI councils and considering it part of how they conduct business. So I'm pretty optimistic on this front.
Interesting, because so we both are software consultants, right? So we work on a lot of software projects, and whenever we work in organizations, they normally don't think about accessibility as a major feature that needs to be tested for. I mean, forget about requirements. No one even wants to test. So I come from a testing background, and I'm like, okay, so now we're talking about non-functional testing. We talk about performance and security, but no one talks about accessibility. And and if someone talks about it, they say, okay, let's see if we meet the certain criteria, and that should be good. But I think it's quite important to have that mindset right from the beginning, like right from the requirement itself. Um, have the notion that this product is one day going to be used by someone with some disability, and will they be able to use it. I think that notion is quite important. And one of the reasons I reached out to you was, I heard a talk from Scott Davis. I'm not sure if you've heard. He works for ThoughtWorks, and he has written plenty about accessibility. And one of the key things that he mentions about accessibility is that, I mean, if we want to make people think more in terms of capitalism, is that, think about this: there are a lot of people in the world who cannot access the internet, and they have money, and if they can access the internet, then that money is in your pocket. So how do you make the internet more accessible? So I think that's a very interesting concept, because a lot of times when we think about the internet, it's just people with proper limbs, proper eyesight, proper hearing, and but there are a lot of people's who don't have a limb, who are paralyzed, who don't have good eyesight, who have hearing problems, and they are not included. And if we include them, then it means there are more customers for your business. There are more services that you can offer to more people, and I think that's a very powerful concept. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I wish more people thought that way.
Yeah.
No, I'm optimistic. This is the 10th anniversary of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I'm seeing more companies adopting policies that are in line with this, as well as at least even being aware of the issue, which is great. Microsoft has gone through a huge transformation in the accessibility and inclusive design space, and they're threading it into basically every layer, as far as I can tell, of how they conceive and build and maintain projects. So if they can do it,
Yeah,
you can do it. If you,
exactly. I
yeah,
think, I've seen this Microsoft. I think there is a document. I think we'll share that along with the video as well. That they have put like, why do you need to consider accessibility? And they put a nice diagram about the different aspects in which a person needs to access a digital product or service, and how they access it, and what could be the possible scenarios where a disabled person comes in and then uses it. So I think that's a nice diagram. And you're right, Microsoft doing huge in terms of promoting this features to the general population.
Yeah, they're also making a lot of money doing it. Um,
I think it has to be in a balance. If people are not making enough money, people will not push out for those features. So and I think that's where organizations are now thinking that, okay, we have already reached a mass, everyone is able to access, but then there's still a lot of other people that who cannot access the internet and these digital services. How do we reach them? I think moving on, let's again focus on some other topics around A11Y project and why it's relevant, especially in the age of JavaScript.
Mhm.
Now, these days, every other website is built on using some form of JavaScript. And what that means is that there is very less HTML being used to create a website. So how does accessibility or even A11Y project fit into that space where people are building using cutting edge web technologies, React, Angular, and those kind of frameworks, and then A11Y project applies only to HTML and CSS. That's what I'm aware of. I'm not sure if it applies to JavaScript as well. So what should these websites be doing in order to make these websites more accessible?
Sure. We have a post on this on the A11Y project.
Okay.
So there is a myth that JavaScript does not affect accessibility. It does. And the good news is modern website building techniques, such as single page applications, um, can be made accessible. And the thing I'd like to stress is, they may serve HTML in a different way, but it's more about what HTML they're serving and why. So if you find yourself writing a div to contain the main content of your page, use the main element instead, and then somebody who is using assistive technology can hop to it and say, this is the main content of the page. I know what it is now. And that's important. If you have motor control issues, that means it's a lot less work to get where you're going. If you can't see the screen, it means you can quickly identify it without having the ability to visually parse the page and see what's in the center column with 16-point text. JavaScript is actually really good for accessibility. I may live to regret saying this, but
Okay.
there is a suite of attributes for HTML called ARIA. And since you have a testing background, I think you'll actually appreciate this. ARIA is a way to programmatically communicate state. So if you have an accordion and it's in its collapsed state, you can use JavaScript to toggle an attribute to say you are collapsed, and when you're clicked, you're toggled into an expanded state. And the same way you can build a testing harness to say, like, is this expanded or collapsed? Tests are failing. Oh no. That state manipulation via JavaScript can be communicated to assistive technology. So a screen reader could encounter this and say, accordion collapsed. And know, okay, not only is there an accordion here, but it's in a collapsed state. And if it's collapsed, that means I can expand it. And if I expand it, I can move it back to a collapsed state. So that's huge. That's really cool. And that's important because that means the experience between different, modes of navigating the web are closer, which means that they're enjoying kind of the same level of experience across the board.
I think the shortcut of saying this is sort of follow the best practice.
Yeah.
Follow the rules that are already there. Like whatever is we in HTML or whatever is classed as the main object. Put that in there, so it's all well identified and well labeled. It's kind of good coding practice to begin with. So yeah, it's just be a good coder.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're looking for a really easy way to get started, the tab key is your best friend. So whatever you're working on, just mash the tab key a bunch, see if visual focus, so a little ring around interactive elements to your links and your buttons, see if it will move to your links into your buttons. And if it does, you can use space or return on your keyboard to activate them to either do a thing or go a place. If they don't, take a look at the markup under the hood and change it. But just doing that, not even for your whole web experience, just whatever ticket you have right now for whatever feature, just encapsulate it in that. Like that goes a huge distance towards making things interoperable and therefore accessible.
That's kind of interesting because I mean, me and a couple of friends, we were actually trying to build a website, and we tried to use tab, and one of the tab went from one tab. It didn't go in sequence basically. It just went somewhere else, and I was like, okay, so if a person with proper hands and proper, I'm able to use my keyboard and mouse, and if I'm struggling with that, imagine how would assistive technology struggle with that same aspect of, okay, I want to go to the next one, but I don't know where to go or where am I going, and it's yeah, it's interesting problem. So also, I mean, when we are talking about A11 project, we are mostly talking about websites on different devices. Are we talking about desktop applications as well? And what about mobile applications? Because the challenges are different in different devices just because of the form factor. And you mentioned that in accessibility, the assistive technology, sorry, it has to have be robust. So it should be, I mean, no matter what platform you use, you should still be able to use it, like the responsive websites. But what about applications? Not websites, but applications which are inbuilt to the platform, Windows applications, desktop applications, mobile, Android apps, iOS apps. What about those? Does A11Y project work across those, I mean, applications as well?
Yeah. Um, in the short,
Okay.
a lot of native applications, so mail or kind of like basic text editing, utilize basically frameworks that the operating system has to construct interfaces and are, if not amazingly accessible, good enough to be operable. It gets a little blurry. So like Microsoft produces the Office suite, which is not, a core part of the operating system, but is also, as I understand it, very accessible compared to some other solutions. And then extending that, depending on how you build your app, either on a desktop, laptop, or on a mobile device such as a phone or a tablet, can be as well, depending on if you are using kind of these native features, you get a little bit more built in. And then if you go kind of off-roading and build your own, there are attributes that you can include to make sure that they, describe themselves. So like you can, if you have a UI kit, you can drag a button into your view and it'll be like, oh, cool, this is a button. The same way you can drop an image in if you want a fancy custom looking button, you can describe it as such that it'll be announced as a button. So it'll take a little bit of extra work, but it is definitely possible. And I'd say it's incredibly important as well because, as you mentioned, phones are very popular and only becoming even more popular in emerging markets, populations that have never been online before, or populations that have historically not had the income to access the internet are getting it. And this is foreign countries, as well as, I should point out, native populations in the UK and the US, where there is a lot of poverty. And apps are king. Apps are usually a lot friendlier towards bandwidth. So if you're on a metered data plan, they come stock, a lot of them. So it never occurs to you to kind of go off and find an app. So I'd say it's very important. And it's a slightly different way of building compared to the web, but it is definitely very doable. And I'd say a little bit more manageable in that with an app, you typically have an idea of a little bit more of your hardware requirements and your kind of your screen requirements.
Sure. Okay. That's good to know because, as you said, the developing economies they have now. Uh, I mean, so many mobile phones are now entering into people's houses, and everyone is getting online. And mobile first is now the current thing, and Google is now ranking websites based on that as well. They've changed their search algorithm. If you don't have a mobile site, then your ranking goes down. So I think yeah, that's quite an important feature. So moving on from that, I mean A11Y project checklist, everything is there, etc. But which part of the economy does it impact the most? Does it help the government organizations because they have to provide critical services to a lot of people? Does it help a lot of open source developers? Does it help a lot of organizations? So, I mean, as a maintainer, what are the trends that you normally see with the adoption of the A11Y project and the checklist that you have published? Do you see a trend where the governments are adopting these standards more frequently now, or do you see that there are more organizations that are adopting? So, what kind of trends are you seeing across that space?
Yeah, I'm seeing more private companies adopting it, which is great.
Okay, interesting.
And I'm seeing a lot of industry leaders adopt it proactively as a way to develop software, design and develop software, as opposed to a punitive model, which is we have been sued and so we must change. And I do want to say that, you know, if you do get sued, it sucks, but that person is well within their rights to do it. Accessibility is about protecting the rights of an individual to access, you know, materials and services the same way anyone else can. And it's important to keep that in mind. So if we want to talk a little bit more about inclusive design, which includes accessibility, but is more proactive, I feel, I think that's great, which is you're coming into this mindset of, yes, there is the whole world. That's our audience. You know, how can we proactively accommodate them? What decisions can we make earlier on in the process to ensure that anyone can use this? That's what I'm starting to see with a lot of the trendier startups and kind of the larger companies. You know, Google just had its latest keynote,
Yes.
and access was kind of a top level billing. Compare that to 10 years ago, where it was kind of a more of a niche topic. Apple just rolled out its newest, you know, accessibility considerations for the watch. I'm blanking on the feature names, but again, they're using that as a marketing vehicle, and not kind of a footnote in a release note on a web page no one will read, and that's huge.
That is amazing. Yeah, I mean, it is like fascinating to think that where we've come from what it was 10 or 20 years ago. This is now, you know, a part of mainstream media or marketing of these big tech companies, and that makes a huge difference because a lot of the times when they start, a lot of other smaller companies follow, and it becomes norm. And that's what we want. We want this to be a normal, a norm, an expected situation rather than an additional situation. So yeah, I mean that is, but yeah, I mean we have to remember that the journey is not finished. I mean we're nowhere close to, being fully inclusive yet. And when everyone, automatically thinks of all of these accessibility scenarios by default, then we can sort of think that we've reached our goal. But that's far away.
So,
Um, so
yes, I
what?
mean, Rinat, sorry, I just wanted
No,
to
sorry, I was
have a question because
go on.
I was thinking about the standards that you mentioned, right? If everything is a standard, then it becomes easy, and if developers follow the standards, then yeah, it's more accessible, the whole internet. But we also have this WCAG. I was just Googling about it when I was researching a bit more about A11Y project. So Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So if you already have a guideline, how does A11Y project complement that? And are those guidelines similar to what A11Y project is doing, or are they different?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so kind of the first part is accessibility as a process. I am constantly learning about it. I will have gotten it wrong, will get it wrong. And one thing you can definitely feel, especially when reviewing the checklist or the web content accessibility guidelines, is that this is huge. And the mindset that I keep that I think is very healthy is every little bit helps. So there's no perfect accessibility. There's only incremental change in a positive direction. The community is actually very understanding and very appreciative of accessibility work. So, it's one of those things when you start to do it, people start to notice. And one of my favorite things is when you're not even like actively paying attention and somebody kind of casually mentions it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's amazing, I love it, because it means it's working. So for the checklist and for the WCAG, which is how I pronounce the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there's a lot of debate about how to pronounce it. The checklist serves as a gateway to the WCAG. So the checklist items map back to WCAG criteria, and the criteria are basically a numbered list of rules which dictate access. And I say rules because they're kind of higher level than like, here's how to implement this. It's more, if you have a kiosk, if you have a website, if you have like an ATM, anything that has a digital interface abides by these rules. It's actually an ISO standard, so it predates a lot of web tech. It's also kind of, if you map back government policy, it maps back to the WCAG as a legal standard. So if you really get into the reeds of this, or you get a really tenacious lawyer, it's eventually going to go back to the WCAG as a way to determine if something is or is not accessible. The problem with the WCAG is it is very dense. Take any technical manual you've ever read and then multiply it by 10, and that's the WCAG. So it's not what I would say easy to parse as a beginner. And so first, work is being done by the WCAG to address this. It is going through a major revision right now, taking it from version 2 to version 3, and I'm very excited about that. And then second, again, the checklist, we tried to take some of the most common, some of the most like critical issues, and then put them out in a more plain language, easy to understand format. And so like certain ones will map directly back to one rule, certain kind of cover 2 or 3, but it's more just like, this is something I can hit to like triage the biggest problems you might fix. or you might encounter.
Nice, nice. So I mean, yeah,
So,
that kinds of give me a better idea because I keep hearing about WCAG, if I use your pronunciation. But and A11Y project just came into my like Google search, and then I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. And there are, I think, a lot of projects which are doing a lot of work in the accessibility space. So if someone like me or someone like say Rinat and we want to contribute to the A11Y project, how do we begin? Where do we start? What can we do actually? I mean, if you guys have done such an amazing work, what else is there left to contribute?
Oh, so much. We will take any and all help anyone is willing to give. We are open source, so if you are comfortable using Git and code, um, we have an issue tracker on GitHub with some open issues. We have basically a list of kind of posts we'd like to have written. If you are not comfortable using Git or code, we also have workflows for writing new articles or making content changes, including different ways to contact us and work through submissions. We post articles that are written by the community, and we pay, which is a new development, which I'm very excited about. So it's $75 per article, which allows us to be a little bit competitive with other publishing sources while also, maintaining us as a volunteer-led effort. We have resources. So if you have ever found a resource that you think is really valuable for your workflow, that's something you can submit. We have a newsletter if you'd like to participate passively just by, kind of reading what we put out. And that's a roll up of what we tweet out via Twitter throughout the week. And that's kind of a hodgepodge of articles that deal with programming and accessibility, disability culture, kind of news in the industry, just kind of a little bit of everything to kind of get a better idea of what's going on. So you can also follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. We have an organization there as well. And yeah, we try to make the project itself inclusive and welcoming and easy to approach as well. We have contribution guidelines that kind of outline how to best work with us. We have a content style guide for how to write your content. We also have a code of conduct, which I think is important for an inclusive community that outlines behavioral norms and what we tolerate and what we don't and why. Which is all to say we would love any and all help.
all right. I mean, that's marvelous because there's so many ways to be involved and contribute. And hopefully the audience, listeners and viewers who are tuning into this podcast, there will be many who would like to be involved or contribute in any way. So yes, audience, I urge you guys to sort of check out the project, check out the website. And if it does interest you, or if you think you can contribute in any way, all of these different ways that Eric just mentioned, in any way, any help would help the project to go further. So definitely check it out and see if there are anything you can do. So what are some of the future projects or future things that you have plans for the project?
Oh, that's a good question. We just went through a major redesign, which I'm very happy with, and recently have just kind of been fixing some of the kinks that have shaken out from that. I'm happiest when the site is not doing much, which sounds a little weird, but it's been around for, I think, 14 years, which is forever in internet time. Yeah. It's got pretty good SEO placement, and it's built on a stack that's pretty resilient. It's 11D node Markdown, SAS, and Nunjux, which is kind of one step above vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And what I like I think it's working best. Like its killer feature is that it shows up in search results. I like it when people get just enough information to get to answer the question that they have, maybe entice them to learn a little bit more, but put it down and get back to doing what they're doing, and hopefully making it a little bit more accessible after reading our content.
Awesome. That is just so much eye-opening and insightful to know all of this information, and I'm actually feeling quite quite well, if I want to say privileged to know about this, because yeah, I actually wasn't aware of the project at all, but now coming to know about it and finding out more, it's just amazing, and hopefully our audience will feel the same way, and they would want to be involved in any way they can.
I was just thinking about some other aspects of disability. I mean, and this is coming from your profile on A11Y project, and you mentioned about cognitive, emotional, practical, and physical needs. So I think we covered physical needs and maybe practicality. But how about cognitive and emotional needs? How does A11Y project help with that, or even accessibility? I mean, it's just for the benefit of all our viewers and listeners, because I think when we think about disability, we are thinking only about physical disabilities, but there are some other types of disabilities as well that can impact the way people interact with a digital product or service.
Sure. Cognitive accessibility is huge. The WHO, the World Health Organization, did a survey of disability globally a few years back, and I'd say the overwhelming majority of disability is cognitive, like something like 70%. So of the entire world's population that's experiencing disability, the majority of that is cognitive. And then there's an interesting twist to that as well, in that a lot of people that are experiencing cognitive disability may not identify as disabled. So I think that the number is even bigger, which is to say cognitive accessibility concerns are also tied to emotional disability concerns, depression being one of the larger disability conditions, which affects your ability to operate in your environment, which is to say that depression will actually affect your ability to process and act on information, which is both depressing and fascinating to think about, which is this is, not only a condition you can experience permanently as something that is just part of how your brain works. It can also be brought onto you environmentally. So stress from work, say a global pandemic without end. So environmentally, it can be triggered. But what that translates to is your ability to operate in the world. And part of operating in the world is utilizing technology. And like a good example of that, just to kind of hammer the point home, is like if you've ever been stressed at a deadline at work and you're just trying to get something to compile and it won't, and you scream and you give up and you come back to it the next day feeling a little bit better, and oh my God, it was right in front of you this entire time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, yeah, your brain doesn't work at its full efficiency when you are, under stress or under depression. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think during the pandemic, the rate or the statistics of people in depression or other mental health condition has increased quite significantly, and it is something to be wary of, and be, people, be it's good to take actions based on these information, and we should think about what we can do to help this as well, because this is, I mean, our lives have permanently changed in many aspects. Yeah, maybe we will go back to some sort of normality, but it will never be exactly how it used to be like before, and that could have various effects to, for many people, and it is important to be vigilant and aware of this and take actions to help that.
Yeah, I think like talking about it is good, like destigmatizing it. Like depression does exist, it does impact people, it especially impacts people in the pandemic. Kind of on the cognitive, there are other concerns that come with that. And I'd say another huge one, and this is in the intersection of development and design, is digital literacy. So there's a bit of a fallacy here that smart people are computer literate and not smart people are computer illiterate. I've met smart people that are computer illiterate, and I've met not smart people that are computer literate. And then I also question the definition of what computer literate is, which is like, can you use an entire operating system and all of its features? Do you know just enough to use the software that your job mandates that you use? Can you use it well? And then what kinds of interfaces are those pieces of software using? So like, if you've ever seen a cryptic button and you don't know what it does and you're afraid to touch it because you don't know if it'll like drop a database or not, that's an example of kind of cognitive accessibility concerns, which is you don't have the mental framework that the person constructing the interface did to understand and take action on it with confidence. And that's not necessarily a condemnation of you. That's more the person who built it. So making sure that if you do have a cryptic button like that, you do label it, and then potentially even add like some warnings there where it's like, are you sure you want to do this? And maybe tell them why they don't want to do it.
Yeah, a lot of the times I do come across softwares or dialog boxes where it's not clear at all, and I am here confused, thinking where do I go from here? And then having to go back to Google and describe the situation. It's not good design. And yeah, absolutely, designers have to think about so many of these things. And this reminds me of another thing that happened during the pandemic, actually. Robinhood, the app, I think became quite popular in US for stock trading. And the way they show the balance of one's account. Sometimes the balance is not cleared, or the money has left the account, but it still shows, and it wasn't a good design. And a person, I think, took his own life, thinking that they have lost a large sum of money, but they actually didn't. It's because of the design that they misunderstood their account balance, and this is how serious implications there can be with bad designs. And absolutely, I mean, designers have this massive responsibility to actually look at all kinds of perspective and think about what is a good design, and so people are not confused and actually being able to do what they're there to do.
Yeah, I remember that event as well, and it's tragic. And I think it's also illustrative of the point of more stuff is going digital, and this is real, and this is important. And
Yes.
then I know we like to harp on developers for not making things accessible, but most of it is design. It's the design layer.
Yes.
Yes.
I
And
think design and requirements. I mean, I was working on a government project quite recently, and because as a tester, I was just trying to give them feedback about how the user journey should be like. Have they thought about this button? They missed out a delete button, and then how do you cancel and come out? And is it prominent? Can I read it clearly? Is it like high contrast? I think that those kind of things are quite important, especially for a government service. And here in UK, they have guidelines, which is really good. But yeah, I see the relevance that yeah, it's not developers' fault that they build a system, because they have to look at the design and they have to look at the requirements. They build what is asked of them. They're not building something creatively until unless it's their own project. So yeah, we should not blame developers for everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a shared concern, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I wish I had more QA testers like you as a designer.
Yeah, I think, I was just talking to someone just today, and we were discussing about QA as a gatekeeper, or quality as a shared responsibility. And I think
Mhm.
people are now slowly moving away from the concept that, okay, QA is a gatekeeper. No, it's a shared responsibility, and it starts right from the top level, the CEO. How do they see their product? How do they see their service? And how are they enabling the organization to deliver a good quality product? Are the processes there? Are the people enabled? Are the people making the right decisions, writing the right requirements, design, development, testing? So I think it's a shared responsibility.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. My favorite way to work is collaboratively. So, like in the before times, sitting right next to the developer and chatting with them as opposed to like throwing it over the wall. And I think like you touch on a really interesting thing about accessibility here, where it is uh, a shared concern in that, you know, designers can be making accessible design decisions the same way developers can be making accessible development decisions the same way QA can be testing using assistive technology or using that tab key. It has to get socialized into these workflows, which is the trick.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a very insightful conversation. I think our audience will benefit greatly from all this, all the things that we talked about. Is there anything? I mean, we have kind of gone over an hour, so I'm just thinking, is there anything else you would like to mention,
Oops, I
Eric,
think.
to our audiences?
um, Accessibility is beneficial to all and required for many. It does not to have to be an overwhelming process where you have to get everything right. It is a journey, and every little change compounds and makes things better for everyone. And it's a very friendly and welcoming community. The A11Y hashtag is a great way if you do Twitter to kind of poke around and see what's going on. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out and email somebody if they put that information out there. And just thank you for listening and for considering it.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much, Eric. I mean, this was actually very eye-opening for me as well, and hopefully our audience will check out the project and be involved in one way or another.